And now, this other object on the first floor has obvious tube drill holes. Again, this is granite containing quartz crystal. In order to be able to produce a drill that could cut through this, you need to have at least diamond level technology.
Okay, so before we go further and look into the issue of core drilling and why the analysis of it, well, firstly let's look at the issue and the repeated claim that granite cannot be worked prior to so-called diamond technology, diamond tools. This is ridiculous, false, wrong, the Mount Everest of wrongness. I just googled 1850s tombstones. Why I chose tombstones, because grave markers have dates on them, we know where they are, and they're also, well, hundreds of thousands of them spread around the world. But granite tombstones, mausoleums were being sold to the public. Widespread use become very popular during the mid-1800s, some 50 years before diamond tool technology was invented. Anyone who claims that granite cannot be worked with these softer tools, and Mohs hardness scale is a very tricky subject, but if they quote Mohs hardness scale, generally look deeper into it, don't accept it, because it's, again, very, very wrong. But just by Googling these claims, please always fact check what I'm saying and fact check what they're saying, and you'll see that it just falls apart. It's just not correct. So definitely granite was being used before. Anyone who claims you need diamond technology to do it smooth or to polish it, just wrong. And I'll come more to that, because I'll be looking at machining, so-called machining marks, and how they just match both existing but also recent experiments to replicate that. So it's an issue of credibility, and anyone who says granite cannot be worked before diamond tools has no credibility to talk about stone at all.
And now, this other object on the first floor has obvious tube drill holes. Again, this is granite containing quartz crystal. In order to be able to produce a drill that could cut through this, you need to have at least diamond level technology.
Before we go on, let's look at this particular video. This is used as the gold standard in the Lost High technology community in regards to the difficulty or impossibility of cutting stone or drilling a tube. This is with a copper tube into limestone. Take note, now look at the gentleman holding the stone at the top of the tube. The tube is actually cutting twice. It's cutting the weight at the top and it's drilling in at the bottom. This could be made much more efficient simply by having a fixed weight at the top of the tube drill, and a few other little, including using lubrication would be for one. And they only use desert sand. They're not using a harder abrasive. So again, this particular method, which is, well, depends what you call slow, because again, in the original full version they say, well, probably back in the day the workers were a little bit more motivated than modern people and had a little bit more patience in regards to these things. But it does work. But there's also another, this particular bow method as well. You begin standing still and then you accelerate and then you slow down and then you accelerate and slow down. So the RPM, the revolutions of that drill, is pretty slow in comparison. But next we'll look at the Scientists Against Myth channel, who have not drilling with copper into limestone, they drill with copper into granite. Apparently impossible until diamond tools, yet there it is. You'll find the links in the description to the Scientists Against Myth channel. They've started an English language channel, so they're Russian speakers, but now they've added English narrations. I'll also put the link in the description to their much larger Russian language channel, which does a lot of amazing, allegedly impossible, again, impossible. So if the impossible can be done, then all the claims built around the impossibility fall apart. But those links will be in the description. Also to the Russian language channel. You don't need to understand Russian to understand the visuals of them cutting stone, even with bone, just plain old animal bone. This Mohs hardness scale is Well, and Finn too. It's remarkable some of the things you hear claimed. They're just like not demonstrably untrue, non-factual, and the evidence is there. And the that earlier exhibit of the drilling a core hole into limestone, that is repeated often and often. But the contrapoints, which are in the comment section and have been responded to, so they have been seen by Brian Foster and all these other clone channels, and yet it's conveniently, very, very conveniently, never placed in there. It's just, yeah, so let's just stick with the evidence and look at, and we'll now examine that particular method of cutting core holes into granite, the impossible cutting into granite without diamond tools, just with a simple copper tube, very simple technique. And there's evidence of that in depictions of the Egyptians doing that themselves. So it's not just that it does work, we also have archaeological evidence that it was used in the past.
Quartz crystal, in order to be able to produce a drill that could cut through this, you need to have at least diamond level technology.
You will find the full video in the description, but there we see, now they're using a small piece of granite because, well, you know, whether it's small or large is insignificant. That is the tool that they're using. It's a wooden handle, copper tube on the end, and a weight at the top. In this case, they use plaster. Egyptians, of course, had whether it's stone, plaster, or whatever, even a large piece of wood. It doesn't really matter. But the beauty of this particular method is, well, the design of it. Now, also, I could think we could improve that slightly by actually lowering the weight to a lower center of gravity, but this particular one is based closely on existing Egyptian depictions, and this is why it's important. It's not just they've found a way and invented it out of, you know, a pure new invention. The actual pictures and descriptions from ancient Egypt match these. Now, there are other videos. I'll go into the making those stone vases. Olga, who's one of their collaborators, has done wonderful examples of this, and she uses a method more like this. But there we can see on those top pictures where that particular drill, we can see with that curved handle and the weight at the top. Again, we're drilling with a pure copper tube, and they're using copper, but they're drilling into granite again. Now, I remind you, the Lost High Ancient Technology community, not as a whole, I wouldn't say, but Brian Foster, and which is a leading figure, one of the main figures, and also these clones will repeatedly keep telling you that you cannot work granite with copper. They will even tell you can't work it with steel. I'm not making that up. Anyone who's familiar with the work knows that he says this. I've shown him quoted in other examples. The difficult part in drilling is beginning. So here they've just got a small piece of wood with a hole drilled in it. The operator might have had a large plank, and instead of G-clamps to hold it down, he simply stands on it. So just to get the process started, it's helpful to use a jig, something like that, to keep it in there. So, okay, modern G-clamp, small piece of stone. This is, if you want to argue that, these are like irrelevant issues. If you think that that's an issue, well, God help you, because whether it's large or big, that plank could be much larger, and this is just one way to start it off. So please don't, if you want to put that in the comments, I'm going to call you a fool, because these are non-issues. With that done, they're using, is it plasticine, but this could be done with clay again. Standard available materials, so any criticism, well, clay works just as well. So the clay is to create a well, a pool. Now they're going to add water into that, and then they're going to add corundum, crushed abrasive, a very hard stone on Moscow, and that's where Moscow applies in regards to abrasives. It has nothing to do with copper chisels working harder stones. This is a much more complicated issue, but as a basic concept, Moscow applies to abrasive. So we add an abrasive. Now it could use just granite dust as well, but this corundum available to the Egyptians at the time. There was actually a trade in these abrasives, as mentioned in Pliny, and they were going so far as India to get special sand, which they knew would polish their stone and their columns to a very, very high sheen. So they're going to use You could have used oil as well, I suppose, but we have this abrasive. They're using adding water to it as well because this helps the process. Just like in modern machinery, it's it's a lubricant and well other features in it as well, but that's not really important. But the beauty of this system is that we have matching depictions, like in terms of archaeological evidence. Now, why don't we find these? Because these things don't last over time. Copper was very, very valuable. It was money. There are very few copper tools found across the ancient world because it's like finding a bar of gold. You can use it as money. Now, look at this. He has high revolutions. Instead of struggling with the bow and struggling with the weight on top and drilling two holes, like in that earlier example, he's just drilling one hole. And more importantly, the weight at the top, conservation of momentum. That weight as it spins wants to keep spinning, and it's actually assisting him in this particular process. Also because he keeps going in the one direction, unlike the bow method going back and forth, accelerating, decelerating, accelerating, decelerating, much more efficient in that sense as well. Now we see it's like with most tools, when the young apprentice comes in, it's difficult to start off with. A craftsman, or even just a second year apprentice with a little bit experience in the tools, as we see here, he can work these very well. This particular experiment, and again I'll invite you to watch the whole video, links will be there in the description. Not only does it use copper, apparently impossible. Again, they claim that this is impossible, and it's a foundation stone of the Brian Foster lost high technology argument. Once this falls apart, just like with lifting, just like with the unexplained claw marks, the emperor has no clothes, and so there we see this is one of their experiments. So that alone, copper drills into granite as long as you understand about lapidary and abrasives. Even in Pliny he talks about these abrasive sands, which they also use to polish precious gems, rubies, diamonds, etc. So again, diamond, Mohs scale, all of that is so much fluff and nonsense in regards to these particular arguments. You can see some other examples there over his shoulder of them drilling granite with a copper tube. Apparently impossible, yet it's done. So anyone who says it's impossible, they don't know what they're talking about. And given the fact that they do know, and that they're resistant to these facts, and they will not. They'll use that limestone example we saw earlier, but they won't use these particular type of examples because it just destroys the narrative and the fiction, and that's what it really is. It's a fiction. It's a cult, because they don't any evidence which is contradictory is dismissed. It's often, and I would agree in philosophy, that there is a resistance among the mainstream to look into these things, but all of these political arguments aside, the fact is that you can drill granite with copper. This we can see this is established as a fact. You can, if you want to, you can repeat this experiment. They show you how to do it there. But there's another much more important feature. So it's not just about being able to drill granite with a copper tube, and again, it's understanding abrasives and how things actually work, as opposed to a lot of this dialectic. Anyway, and where's the next part? Okay, I'll pause a moment. Okay, so not only is the impossible possible and being suppressed, I would suggest, possibly by those who, well, it's very important to their income. Beautiful method, actually works. Evidence for it in again ancient depictions of it. Although it doesn't match this, there's also a hieroglyph for a stone drilling tube. I think it's in Gardner or Budge as well, but there's also hieroglyphs for these stone drilling tools as well. Not this particular one, but we saw earlier where these carvings are. It's a beautiful system. It takes full advantage of old school thinking. It's what works, and the weight, instead of counteracting drilling two holes by pushing the weight down on the top, by fixing the weight to the main shaft of it, it actually helps you. And again, conservation of momentum, just like a spinning top. Once it gets spinning, it also helps stabilize it as well. With a little bit of practice, the newcomers to this can develop their skills very quickly. We saw the gentleman there on the right who's more skilled at it. Again, the same thing. Once you drill a hole, this again punching it out just with a chisel. This also matches the bottom of existing core holes which aren't explained. But the important part here is the drill here, the core drill, the core hole, the core is tapered. This is one of the important arguments in regards to the impossibility of core drilling, that it's impossible for it to be tapered. No, it isn't. It's actually it's just naturally going to happen through this particular process as well, because as the drill spins, it's ever so slightly wobbling from side to side. This creates the helix, the impossible to replicate helix. It also replicates for tapering. That particular tube that they use is a solid tube. Now if you were to take a shaft of wood and wrap a piece of copper around it so it's a split, they also have replicated the opposite tapering. So there's tapering down and then there's tapering out, and they have replicated both of those on granite with copper tools, and also replicated the helix marks, the impossible marks to connect to there as well. So let's look at the image. So now we come to Core 7, made famous by Petrie. Petrie commented on this, and he believed that there were large diamonds attached to a tube drill. This is now the sort of standard, but as we just saw now, Petrie's opinion, Petrie was not a material scientist, he was archaeologist, skilled surveyor and such. He was not skilled in that particular thing. So either way, Petrie's opinions on this are irrelevant, because we see that this works. What someone's opinion is as in regards to demonstrable, repeatable experiments. So Core 7 on the top, including the tapering. Again, I would link you back to that Scientists Against Myth channel, and also their Russian language channel, because they're preparing to publish some works in regards to this. At the bottom of the screen, on the left hand side, we see Core 7, and on the right hand side we see the replica, the experiment using a copper drill and just a water and an abrasive, and how these marks are matching. Apparently these are impossible and unrepeatable, yet there it is once again. So claims that granite can't be worked with before diamond technology, copper can't work other harder stones, using Mohs hardness scale as a reference in regards to stone versus copper, for instance, that people couldn't lift heavy objects. Well, if they could sail a boat, they could rig the boat, and it's just necessary to have mechanical advantage. You just apply that to lifting. A single person can lift many times their own weight with a single piece of rope and a frame. You don't need a really elaborate compound pulley system, a trucker's hitch or a hitch knot. It gives you that same mechanical advantage. But we see these marks, the tapering, the impossible made real just by through experimentation, and also that this particular tool and method superior to the bow technique in many ways, much faster. They drill into granite faster than what the copper drill went into limestone, using that bow drill technique, which is drilling two holes, because you're drilling into the weight at the top as well as the bottom. So you can improve that efficiency really quickly, and instead of using sand as an abrasive, just sort of normal desert sand, to use a more specialized abrasive. But all of these claims are and claims of the impossible, and that's the feature. Now I'm not going to get into an argument of dates, who, where or when, because the claims that usually go into those arguments say, well, it had to be back at a certain date or a certain time. But they begin with a thing of saying this is impossible with modern technology, this is impossible with ancient technology, but it's not, and it's repeated, and there you can see it, and you can test these things for yourself, which is the most important part. So if you want to hold on to a core belief, well, freedom of religion and all that, but if you say impossible, that's implying like a scientific fact, and no, it's not true. It's just not true. And you're adding to the dumbing down of society in the age of information, which is one of the paradox of actually the age of the information age, is the dumbing, fortunately, and the loss of ancient craftsmanship as we move to 3D printers and more craftsmanship. But fortunately, people such as these, this literally smashes it out of the water. The core claims of impossible. If they say impossible, no, it's not.
And now,
It's time
this
to
other
stop.
object on the first floor
It's
has
time to
obvious
stop,
tube
okay?
drill holes.
No more.
Again, this is granite containing quartz crystal. In order to be able to produce a drill that could cut through this, you need to have at least diamond level technology.